And going to be an interesting day ahead for us here at Top Story because we have in just about half an hour, we'll be joined by Steve Millington from the Twin Falls County Republican Party. They have a big dinner coming up February 28th. He may mention some of the last minute details about all of that. That's Saturday if you're counting. Also, later in the program, we're going to spend only a few minutes with him because he's doing a round robin this morning on multiple radio stations around the state. But Governor Butch Otter, about 5 minutes with us this morning in hopes that sometime soon we'll be able to do something a bit longer. I just have a couple of points we want to touch base with him on as we move through the legislative session. So that's coming up a little later in the program. We're looking probably somewhere after 9:30 this morning. I have lots of things listed today. We have a lot of big stories. Any one of them could be a top story. I don't know that one of them really is standing out right now over any of the others. And I just bring that up. And so I brought with me a healthy stack of paperwork. If people who sometimes watch well, I know you'd have to be somewhat twisted, but if you sit down and watch the videos of some of the programs that we do, you might notice that I come in here with something larger than, well, nobody under the age of 30 knows what a phone book is, but it's as large as a big city phone book material that I bring in. And what I've done is I've gone through multiple sources and highlighted various things that the little yellow highlighters, you get them on sale over at one of the Office Max stores here in town. And I go through about one of those every 2 weeks. It runs out of ink that fast, the way I'm highlighting just page after page after page of material. But I have a number of things that are going on, at least to open up with on the national level, that will be of concern for us on the local level as well. Tomorrow there is it's going to be that decision or that move from or Thursday, 2 days from now. Losing track of my days during the week. On Thursday, the FCC is planning to put in place its new restrictions on the internet. Now, they have been summoned to come into the House of Representatives. I almost said Congress, but the House being just one side of that. They have been summoned, I think, by Jason Chaffetz in Utah to come to the House of Representatives and explain themselves, if you will, about what they're planning, because the 300 and some odd page document has not been released to the public. You think sometimes you live in a free society. Boy, do they have you by the short hairs. So that's going on this week. Also, on March 4th, we're looking at next week, March 4th, the Supreme Court of the United States, known by the acronym of SCOTUS, and I know that sounds like somebody's anatomy. If you go to the AP wire, it just reads SCOTUS, and that's an abbreviation, Supreme Court of the United States. They will be hearing the case, the latest Obamacare case. Now, we won't have a result. We won't know what their decision is until likely June. So that's on the way. And there's just so many things that are popping up on all levels now that could determine our future for the next generation, 30 years. And I think that we have to sit back and realize we've allowed this to happen. As a friend of mine said this morning, I was writing him, it's finally gone mainstream. There is a program that police departments in some parts of the country are using. It's called Stingray. And they can track down a cell phone user to a room. And they're not supposed to be using this because it's a warrantless search, but they've been using it. And the story broke a couple of months ago on Drudge. And at the time, they tried to get an injunction to prevent Drudge from reporting the story, but it has gone mainstream. There's a big story about it today in the Daily Caller. And these are things that he pointed out to me this morning. When I sent him the details on this, he wrote back and said, well, who allowed them to get away with this? In other words, it comes right back to you and your personal responsibility. You can make a decision to stay home and watch American Idol, or you might go down to the local meeting and be heard, have some input. But people aren't generally doing much of that anymore. They don't join much of anything. From the 1950s until the mid-1990s, the number of Americans in bowling leagues per capita dropped by 50%. My guess is if we look at the per capita population and measure it that way, adjusting for the growth in population, we're probably down to about 10%. And if you look at service clubs, Kiwanis, Lions, Rotary, you're likely not seeing anywhere near the people involved with those that you would have seen 30, 40, 50 years ago. Americans would much prefer to stay at home. Cocooning is the word they use. Stay at home, watch Netflix, play video games, and do those things than get involved. And young people becoming more and more libertarian are tending to skew to the notion that they don't really need anyone else and they don't want anyone else in their lives. So community frays at all edges when that happens, and government takes advantage of it. Speaking of the Obamacare story, this is a great headline from Washington Examiner this morning. An Obamacare tell. We'll get to what that means in just a moment. 12 minutes right now after 8 o'clock. 27 at our studios, looking for highs today. 40 maybe at best. And this is Bill Colley, or I am Bill Colley. I wouldn't walk into a room and say this is. I'd say I am. I am Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. A writer by the name of, well, I guess it's an editorial which didn't have a signed a writer to it at Washington Examiner. That probably means it's Timothy Carney. Last Friday, Health and Human Services, I always like these Orwellian names that they give to these departments. Health and Human Services announced that it was effectively extending the February 15 deadline for individuals to purchase insurance through Obamacare. Now, when you hear something like that, what does that tell you? What is the message that conveys? The writer says to start it's yet another indication that any deadline that the administration sets is merely written on water. Furthermore, the individual mandate has been one of the most publicized aspects of the law and the subject of a major Supreme Court case already. Sure, not everybody follows the news, but typically the federal government isn't keen on cutting slack to people who aren't aware of the law. We had that discussion a couple of weeks ago. The old ignorance of the law is no excuse. Of course, when you've got 70 million laws across the country, it could well be in this day and age. In addition, signing up for insurance now wouldn't protect individuals, the writer says, against any fines that they owe for not having insurance last year. Which is they're saying, well, people didn't know about these fines. We're giving them more time to sign up. Well, yes, but it's not going to wipe away your fine for not having insurance last year. So what they're trying to do, obviously, is boost those numbers because the numbers aren't anywhere near what they want, and perhaps the number of people who've signed up has already been overstated by the government. Not that anyone would ever do that for any political reasons. I'm sure you understand that in Washington, they all go there, and it's all like Mr. Smith with Jimmy Stewart, each and every one of them, and they just want to help you. No one has ever been convicted of taking graft. No politician running for president next year has ever taken any money from the Chinese and Saudis. All right, well, forget her. Just forget her for now. She's not actually in office right now, so we can't use Mrs. Clinton as an example. But I'm telling you, these people are so squeaky clean honest, we have to trust everything they tell us. Because when they come out and they show up at town hall meetings or they come door-to-door campaigning, it's always all about you, isn't it? It's 8:14. Bill Colley with you this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX. NewsRadio1310.com online means you can pick us up anywhere all over the world, and you can reach the program this morning by dialing me up, 736-0300. That's 736-0300. I believe we have our first caller of the morning. You're up on the air, in fact, on News Radio 1310 KLIX. And what's the question or comment?
Well, good morning, Bill. I was just commenting on this fine for the insurance. I got insurance August of last year, and I still had to pay a $450 fine. And it was automatic in my tax preparation.
And so they just threw it at you, right?
Yep. No choice, no nothing. Just automatically deducted.
Did you have, well, here's the question, and this is a question I bring up because I wonder if people had insurance partially for the year. Let's say you lost a job, you couldn't afford the COBRA, and so for 3 months you went without insurance. Are you still paying the penalty?
Well, it would appear I had insurance for half the year, and I still had to pay the penalty, so I guess that'd be a question for a tax preparer.
Certainly would. Certainly would. Americans are going to be overjoyed when they start getting all of these bills in the mail.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. In fact, a lot of the lefties who supported this bill in the first place actually thought it was going to be free. Well, they knew someone else was going to be paying for it, but not themselves, so they supported it. I mean, hey, they look at the guy down the street who's got a nice new car and think, he can afford it. So, well, I take it from him. Even though he's working 16 hours a day, 6 days a week at the business that he founded and didn't pay himself for the first 2 years, he can afford it. So he can pay for mine. He can pay my freight. They thought we were getting socialized medicine, that is, single payer, a national health care system, where you just show up and everyone gives you all of your meds for nothing. The doctor doesn't hand you a bill. Surgery, you don't have a bill. The government just picks up the tab. That's what they thought, and the government picking up the tab means everybody else. Maybe even you too, because you're picking up everybody else's tab if you are paying taxes. So there you go. There you go. That is what most people who supported this bill had no idea was involved with it, is that there was going to be some cost. There's cost for premiums. There are penalties if you don't have it. And now they're starting to get that wake-up call. And you know what? It for all of these people, I don't turn on MSDNC any longer, but if you ever accidentally flip by there and they're trying to tell you that everybody thinks just like they do, they're all going to get a rude awakening in 2016. I read last night online, the Democrats have just concluded a meeting where they discussed their losses and what they need to do to turn things around. Because even though they've won the White House twice in the last 2 presidential elections, it hasn't gone anywhere near as well for them in the Senate and the House. And if you look across the country, most state legislatures have been trending Republican, and there has been an overwhelming loss. Republicans now dominate most state houses with governors as well as most state legislatures. And at the local level, the Republican Party. And you know, these people have been telling you over at MSDNC for years that the Republican Party was fading away, but it's anything but. The Republican Party is showing strength it has not seen probably since the 1880s. 8:18. We've got about 1 minute before we have to listen to some of our fine sponsors right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX, but we'll squeeze a caller in. You're up next, and what's on your mind?
Bill, I'd like to say that, it's not just us taxpayers paying for all of this free stuff. The government says they're paying for it, and they're actually kind of right. That's why we're going into debt, because for every dollar we put in, they're spending 2. So it's just not working out.
Yeah, borrowing it from the Chinese, or in many cases, these Islamic nations, we borrow it from their sovereign wealth funds.
Let's just call it selling our country slowly but surely, but people don't understand that.
And I think you're spot on. People have to realize. I think the figure given right now is about 47 cents. That additionally over every dollar that the government brings in, it is just simply they're printing up money or borrowing money. And we had a conversation with a guest last week. In fact, I think we had a conversation with one of our U.S. senators here in studio, Mike Crapo, about how there may be an effort among some people in government to inflate the debt away, which means no matter how good you were at saving for retirement, when you get there, well, dog food, if you can, well, I don't know. If you can't afford the teriyaki sauce or anything else you'd like to put atop it, it probably isn't really, really very good. But it could sustain you at least for a while. It's the cold when you're living under a bridge that might kill you. But don't worry, they've got a program for that. Well, they do now. They won't have it when they don't have any money left and everybody else calls our note. Steve Millington will join us about 8:30 this morning. It's 8:20, 28 at our studios. One of our previous callers, actually was the very last caller, brought up that notion that the United States spends twice what it brings in revenue. So we have to end up borrowing money from a lot of people who don't like us, or we just have to print cash and devalue the actual currency, which of course hurts you and your bank accounts and savings, everything else that you have. If the economy has gotten so much better, as we keep hearing from a lefty, then why this story from Bloomberg Business? U.S. banks hoard $2 trillion of ultra-safe bonds. Now, they wouldn't be doing that if they thought everything was hunky-dory. The writer says, what do America's banks know about the state of the U.S. economy that has them hoarding these bonds? The writer says, borrowers, in particular among Americans scarred by the housing bust, are still repairing their finances rather than going into debt to splurge on big-ticket items. And really, if you're going to turn your economy around by going into debt, personal debt, the U.S. economy survives. 70% of it is based on consumer spending. In other words, we don't build anything anymore. The writer says, and that may mean the U.S. recovery isn't quite as robust as all the upbeat data would suggest. No. Who'd have thunk it? Because when you turn on ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, and MSDNC, they're telling you how great things are, and of course they're telling you who you can be thanking for that. It's called idolatry, actually, in some quarters. It's their faithfulness to an individual in the White House. And then I have one other point I wanted to bring up during this segment of the program, because this is a shorter squeeze of a segment. But I saw this yesterday in the Idaho Statesman, and it's been all over the AP wire as well. Idaho psychologists are seeking authority to prescribe medications. First of all, America is way over-medicated. Let's be honest about that. You know, if your kid gets up and runs around the classroom, they say, oh, he's hyperactive. We've got to give him some medicine to slow him down. Back when I was a kid, going outside and playing and running around and doing all of those things was considered to be what kids normally did. But now you have to medicate them so they just can be little couch potatoes. And then we wonder why there's obesity and we wonder why there's childhood diabetes and all of these things. Well, I'll tell you what, we've got medicines for those things too. So when you get, you create one illness because you gave some medication for the first one, we've got 2, 3, 4, 5 more pills. The writer says Idaho has about 120 practicing psychiatrists. See, now I even think that's too many. I'm sorry, but, and I know people are going to be offended by this because it's, if you're being politically correct, it's called mental illness. But those people out there who are just plain nuts, I understand your need for a psychiatrist, perhaps. But most people, if you've got a little bit of a depression, then go outside and walk around or do something like that, or get involved in your church or community, and it'll help you out greatly. But you go see a psychiatrist, he duns you or your insurer for a huge amount of money, or she, if we're being politically correct, and then they give you some more drugs to take. A bill scheduled for a hearing this week aims to tap the roughly 260 psychologists in Idaho. See, now there are twice as many, so that can ease the shortage by allowing some psychologists to prescribe drugs for mental health disorders. But the associations that represent doctors and psychiatrists oppose the proposal, saying it wouldn't be safe for patients and that a better alternative is to attract or train more Idaho psychiatrists. How do you do that? Well, maybe we'll take some money out of your pocket and we'll put it into a big government fund, and then we'll give it to psychiatrists who can come here and tell you that you're bats and that, we have to give you more drugs. Okay, got it. And here's a quote. There's a big difference between what a psychologist is trained to do and what a psychiatrist is trained to do. That from William Cohn, a psychiatrist in Moscow, who is hold on a minute. Steve, since I am still a relative newcomer around here, Moscow or Moscow? Moscow, right?
It's Moscow.
That's what I thought. I have a friend who lives up there.
Yeah, Moscow. Moscow is a place over in Russia. Moscow is in Idaho.
See, now, the friend I know, I knew her in high school. She was my girlfriend my sophomore year of high school, and she lives up there. The reason I haven't called her to ask her how she pronounces it is because her husband might not like that. So I just... Who is that on the phone? Never mind. Somebody looking how to pronounce the town, that's all. Which would be the truth. But anyway, we have this situation going on, and let me tell you, why do we need to give people more drugs in the first place? Well, because the government says we do. That should make everybody question it all the more often. Do I think psychologists are really trained to do it? I could say no, but if you think about it for a moment, there's a story out in the Washington Post today that says new research has been done that says marijuana is a really safe drug. Now, the graduate students at the university who did that study, of course, were stoned out of their gourds while they were doing it. No wonder they're going to say it. But people already self-medicate. Whether they pick up a bottle of scotch or they pick up a bag of weed, they're already doing all of these things on their own. They don't necessarily even need a doctor in the first place. And yet we're throwing all of this into the mix. By the way, the voice you heard a couple of minutes ago, Steve Millington, is a little early. We've got about a minute before the break, but we've got a lot to talk about in the next half hour.
Yeah, I think we should have a really fun time. Don't go away, people. We're going to talk about raising your taxes.
Yes, I don't recall ever a dull moment while you were in the studio.
We try to avoid that.
Yes, raising taxes. Now, it's very seldom the taxes go down anywhere.
That's true. That's not normal.
There was a native-born Idahoan who got herself elected governor of Alaska, and she reduced the tax burden on the public there, and her payback was being ridiculed by media.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You can't reduce the taxes. What's wrong with you?
People are just, as I say, we better give people some more drugs and then...
Yeah, that's all we need is more drugs.
All right. More with Steve Millington coming up on Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Steve has a couple of stories about some transportation funding issues that, well, would probably curdle some milk. We wanted to remind you that over the last couple of weeks, we've been telling you about a great job opportunity if someone in your family is looking to pick up a few extra dollars per week. Western States Bus Services is hiring part-time bus drivers right now. That would be for routes, school bus routes in Twin Falls. Split shifts, 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. Pay is $10.75 per hour. Apply today by contacting 733-8003. That's 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. I should note, too, that they will also train you. You don't have to pay for that. And they'll help you get that license that you would need. It is 8:30. If you already have it, though, you're off and running. I mean, you got a little bit of a head start on everyone else. 29 at our studios, 8:34. Bill Colley with you on Top Story, News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Steve Millington from the Twin Falls County Republican Party. He's the chairman of that, joins us in studio on Tuesdays. I keep thinking it feels like Monday.
It's Tuesday, Bill.
Good thing there aren't 2 Mondays in 1 week.
Oh, boy, you got that right.
Yeah. We've had a couple of off-air conversations going on here about some transportation funding issues.
Yep. Before we go there, let's talk about our Lincoln Day celebration on Saturday night at Canyon Crest. Social hours at 6, dinners at 7. I checked this morning, and we currently have just over 250 tickets sold. So we need, if you're thinking of coming or want to attend, we really need to get your reservation, because at this point, we're now to the point where we need to set up additional tables to accommodate those people who want to attend. We've got a great cast of people. Brad Little is going to be there. The Speaker of the House is going to be there. The JFAC people are going to be there. All of our local representatives. We've got 4 of the constitutional officers. That includes the Lieutenant Governor, I should say. And we're going to have we got good people, good food, good fun. Saturday night, Canyon Crest, 6 o'clock.
And you could maybe, is Mike Simpson coming along?
We the last I heard, and I have not confirmed this with his office, they were, the last I got on midweek last week, he has hearings in Washington Friday morning from 6:30 to 9:30, and if they can get him on that late flight from Washington, D.C. to Idaho Falls, he will be at our Lincoln Day on Saturday night as well.
That's one of those really long flights that has I think that finishes with a puddle jumper at the end.
Criminy. Idaho Falls does have pretty good jet service. They have direct service from Idaho Falls to Denver, and they used to have a Chicago flight, but I don't think they do anymore. So it's not too bad coming in and out of Idaho Falls.
I did one of those layover flights one time from Detroit to Delaware, and they dropped me in Philadelphia, and I waited 4.5 hours for the short flight when I could have gotten in a car and gone home in 2 hours.
You could have driven it in half the time.
Yes.
Well, anyway, we're gonna have a really good time. We are going to have John Sandy, who is Senator Rish's chief of staff. We're going to have Senator Crapo's local representatives will all be there. So good opportunity, and lots of our state legislative officers. We know that we've got people from District 23, 24, 25, 26, and 27. We normally get a few people from other areas of the state that come to our Lincoln Day because it's too awkward or hard to go back to their home country when they have to be back in Boise late Sunday afternoon or Monday morning. So they come down here to our Lincoln Day, and then they just saves them a huge travel weekend.
Sure, cuts a few hours off that.
So we're looking for a really, really good time.
For people who'd like to know how to buy a ticket,
TwinFallsRepublicans.com, or you could call me at 420-4724, or you could call Chanel at 420-3232.
We should point out this is a short talk window, but we have about 15 minutes after the break coming up. And we're going to be talking about, speaking of driving, some road issues.
Yep. The transportation funding bill has finally seen the light of day. And it's now, it was voted out of committee to the floor of the House. All funding bills have to begin in the House. And so it is going to have its moment, its day in the sun, so to speak. And it's got some things that I don't like. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily totally wrong. It's just that if I were doing it, I think I'd try to do it differently. And so we need to talk about 2 or 3 of those things. Regardless, there is a growing body of thought that the legislature will not adjourn until we get something done with transportation funding. So we are going to see some additional taxes to take care of transportation issues. So this will be an ongoing conversation for the next.
Good golly, they could be there till 2023.
No, we won't, because many of the legislators there are involved in agriculture, farmers and ranchers and so forth. And we see a few real good days, and the ground gets thawed out, and it's time to get some fertilizer down and get some field work done, and they're going to want to give it up and go home.
We've got more coming up with Steve Millington. He is here from the Twin Falls County Republican Party, and we're talking about roads and road repairs and what it's going to cost you, what it might even cost your local government, too, as well. Some shockers coming out through some of the cities around the state, too, as well. They may lose some money they have in order to help bail out the state. It all rolls downhill, as they say. 30 right now at our studios. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Also online at newsradio1310.com, anywhere in the world. Our guest in the studio until 9 o'clock this morning, Steve Millington. He is the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. Joins us on Tuesday mornings. 30 right now at our studios. It's coming up on 8:44. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. And Steve mentioned something to me during one of the breaks about this new transportation funding effort that sometimes you do like to see home runs hit, but you don't win a baseball game on home runs. You do it usually on stringing a lot of singles and doubles together.
That's correct. Now, one of the things that the parts and pieces of this transportation funding bill will now get a lot more activity because they have come out of the transportation committee to the floor of the House. And so we will now begin to tear this thing into manageable pieces and talk about what's involved in there. Now, the main premise is we need to raise a minimum of $200 million a year in additional revenues for transportation funding. Now, keep in mind in the state of Idaho that we have basically two budgets. We have our, quote, general fund budget, and then we have transportation budget. And those two are isolated. They never cross lines. They never cross paths. And so the money that is designated for transportation goes to transportation. And the general fund takes care of everything else, which would be education, health and welfare, corrections, and all other state administrative costs. Well, there's a couple of things in this that everybody is in such a dither over rounding up money for transportation. They don't want to raise any taxes. They just want to cross the boundaries between general fund and transportation fund. And I'm really uncomfortable with that, opposed to the idea. If we want it for transportation, let's put it in transportation and keep it there. Don't start stealing from the general fund budget to take care of transportation costs. Let's leave the general fund budget alone. That's the about 65% of the total general fund budget. That's a little high. It might be closer to 62, 63, but in that range. That's going to be used for education. That's not only K-12, but higher education as well. So 2/3 of that general fund budget is pretty much locked. And then we have Health and Human Services, and then we have corrections, and then we have all other administrative. So there's not an awful lot of additional monies left in general fund. Don't cross once we open the door and start taking money from general fund and giving it to transportation, you will never get that door closed again. They will continue to sneak in there and funnel the money back over to transportation until the general fund suddenly is no longer viable.
Here's a question. Now, you've been listening to all of these arguments year after year after year that come out about all of this. And the story this morning said that we're about 20%, I guess, below where we should be with funding for road repairs. Is there a better solution? Is the other thing is, like, I think most people out in the area that listen to this program every morning that I hear some feedback from believe that there are some simple solutions. Not simple in the sense, everything's going to cost you money, but that sometimes we go through too many circles to get there.
Well, and that's part of my concern with this transportation funding bill. Everybody wants to try, not everybody. It seems as though that the movers and shakers, the people in the legislature, want to create some kind of huge, gigantic, all-encompassing omnibus bill that's going to reorganize the world in 3 days instead of 6. Forget it. Let's just take transportation funding and fix that part of the issue. Now, I do know that included in the transportation funding is a gas tax increase of 8% and a diesel tax increase, not percent, 8 cents per gallon, and diesel taxes of 12 cents per gallon. There's an awful lot of conversation about increasing registration fees on our vehicles when we license them every.
That increase on diesel, if you're a farmer, is going to be just outrageous.
Keep in mind that diesel fuel used in farm tractors off road
will be exempt.
Is exempt from the fuel taxes. But it has to be specifically identified as off-road, and the refiners use a dye to color the road diesel as opposed to off-road diesel. Mm-hmm. And if somebody is suspicious, they can draw a sample from your tank, and if it's the wrong color, this is off-road fuel. Shame on you. We're going to slap your wrists. So, but there are ways to get around that. And if you drive up and down the freeways, you will notice a huge volume of trucks traveling on Idaho's roads. Just unbelievable volume. Now, it is entirely possible for them to fuel up in Snowville, Utah, and go clear to Ontario, Oregon, or Snowville, Utah, and go clear to Dillon, Montana. But the probability is they're going to stop at one of the big truck stops along our major freeway and buy a tank of fuel. That's good for us. So I'm in complete agreement that to pay for transportation, we need to make it, and this is a broad term, don't beat me up too bad, let's make it part of what I call user fees. And gas taxes, diesel taxes, registration fees, licensing fees, those are what I refer to as user fees. If I use the service, I pay for the service. So I drive my vehicle around, and so I buy gasoline. I license my vehicle. I make sure that it's properly licensed and registered so that I can drive it on the roads. Those are the places where we need to collect the revenues to pay for the roads. There are, I'm sure, a lot of duplicity in services that we could minimize. The new director of the Department of Transportation over the weekend made broad statements that he had eliminated nearly $80 million of overhead costs from the Department of Transportation. Well, that goes a long ways towards fixing roads.
We have a guest in the studio, Steve Millington. He's the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. It's 30 at our studios, 10 minutes away from 9 o'clock. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX. Also online anywhere around the world at newsradio1310.com. My name is Bill Colley, and this is Top Story. And Steve, we have a telephone caller, I think, who's looking to reach you. You always seem to draw those.
Yeah, so. It seems like I get plenty of them.
You're on the air with Steve Millington on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Yeah, comment. I travel a lot of the back roads, and I realize most of the big trucks drive. But when they increased that weight limit by 10 tons, I don't remember how many years ago, maybe Steve knows, but I noticed the road beds were not prepared to handle that extra weight. So we're seeing a lot of remakes totally of some of these roads when they do have to do it. Because so when that weight limit went in, that was the first thing, the maintenance cost and rebuilding costs were going to be extremely high.
And, we're seeing that even in the city because Don Hall told me a couple of weeks ago that some of those depressions you see in the streets caused by the tires of these trucks coming through, which simply the weight is actually crushing those roads.
Absolutely, yeah. And so the cities are getting hammered as well because these big trucks have to go through, other areas other than the designated routes, and they're supposed to put down an extra set of wheels, but I know that doesn't happen in all cases. And so consequently, everybody says, well, there's less trucks on the road, but the fact is the trucks that are out there are causing tremendous amount more damage than they would have if we hadn't increased the weight limit.
The weight limit is a big contributing factor, and there's no and I'm smiling to myself. I almost laughed when you said they're supposed to drop those floater axles to kind of even out. Every time I see that, I think to myself, is he loaded or is he empty? I'm a lot happier when I see all the axles on the ground rather than floating. okay, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. They're good, responsible citizens, and they do what they're supposed to do. But you're correct. We allowed, and I don't want to pick on any one industry, but it's an obvious industry. We see all of the milk haulers with the 4-axle trailers and the 3-axle tractors. They don't travel the thoroughfares. They go where they have to pick up the milk.
Sure.
And those are country roads. And those country roads were not originally constructed to accommodate the 124,000 or 129,000 pound loads. So there is a very definite need for rebuilding these county and byway roads. The state is going to handle all of the state highways, the freeways, and these other things. By the way, there was an interesting article over the weekend in the Idaho Statesman that federal funding has decreased almost 20% in the last 5 years. So this is a double whammy. Not only are our costs increasing, but the amount of federal funding has gone down too.
I would imagine that there are people in the transportation department. They know how many bridges are substandard because they do inspections and the like. Maybe we just have to start there saying, all right, we're going to fix these 50 bridges. And then next year we'll fix, and just start. It almost has to be triage.
Well, the current Department of Transportation budget has identified, I think it's 60 to 60 plus bridges that need immediate attention. And if they look at the total bridges in the state of Idaho that have a current life of 50 years, and the useful life engineering study says is about 50. There are 800 additional bridges that fall into this category of we better start looking at these bridges very carefully. Now, some people may be familiar with the Bob Barton Highway. You go down through the Clear Lakes, down through the grade in Buell, across the river, and come up onto Bob Barton Highway. The state and the West, I don't know what it's called, over in Gooding County, Highway District are rebuilding several things. One of them is a bridge crossing over, we call it a coulee. It's kind of an irrigation ditch or a canal, and it's clearly and obviously very old. As you approach it, the road actually makes a little dip as you cross the bridge. It's just barely 2 cars wide, and they're going to replace that this year. It's $1 million bill. And it's not a major thoroughfare, but it's just a bridge collapse waiting to happen.
Right.
So,
right.
But you see, even something that is almost as inconsequential as that's $1 million bill. Now that might be on the high side. It might be $750,000, but they don't give those things away at Walmart. Okay, so we're talking about a lot of money. Now in this transportation funding bill, they've got all kinds of stuff pushed into this thing that. Get it out of there, and let's just do transportation. They want to reconfigure the state income tax brackets and make a one level 6.6% across the board for everybody. And of course the liberals and the naysayers, they're screaming their head off. The low income earners are going to get punished. Well, let's just 1 minute on income taxes. The Idaho code pretty much parallels the federal code. So when you file your personal income tax return, you are given a personal exemption. Now, I think that number is like $3,950 or some such number. I'm going to just round it off to $4,000. So let's say that you are a household, husband and wife, and you have 3 children. That gives you 5 personal exemptions at $4,000 a piece. That's $20,000 worth of exemptions. Your itemized deduction exemption is $12,000. So now all of a sudden, the first $32,000 that you make is not subject to income taxes of any kind. There's a lot of people who make $50,000 a year and don't want to pay a whole lot of taxes. But, at $50,000, you'd only have a very nominal amount of money that'd be subject to income tax rates. And even at that, you're applicable, the rate of income tax is not the 6.6, it's more like 1.5 or 2, because the first $32,000 is exempt from any taxation. However, if we're going to talk about transportation funding and fix the transportation issues, What are they doing with personal income tax? None of the personal income tax money ends up in the transportation budget. It ends up in the general fund. Quit mixing everything together. I don't want a fruit salad. I want my oranges over here and my apples over here and my bananas over there. Quit mixing it up. Leave them alone.
We have to wrap up for this week because
this is the fastest 30 minutes of the whole week.
Steve is such a calm guy too that.
Okay, you got me, Bill. We will. I'm sure we're going to have plenty of opportunity to talk about these issues the next 3 or 4. Now, keep in mind that the legislature, the noise, the background noise now is saying that we're not going home till we get some money for transportation.
And by the way, of course, he's on the phone with me a bit later today. But one of these days, when we get the governor for a longer stretch, you might want to join me during.
Oh yeah,
segment.
I'd love to. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bill.
And of course, he would think that you're going to be a friendly voice, but
he knows better. But I think the important thing is that we have this conversation. It's not so much that we must be totally argumentative, but we must have the conversation.
More coming up. We've got news at 9 o'clock from Fox. One more hour of top story just ahead. The governor coming up in the next hour. You got to help me out on one here. I've been battling back and forth on Facebook over the last couple of days with one of these Facebook connections. I have to say that everybody's my friend. When you start getting up over 1,000 and you get to 12, 13, 1,400 somewhere in that range, you don't necessarily know all of these people, but they're people that may listen to the radio shows that I've done over the course of the last dozen years, and so. You pick up these people along the way, but they bring up some interesting things for debate. And this fellow commented yesterday, I had posted something about Bobby Jindal, the Republican conservative governor of Louisiana, on my Facebook page. And it was Jindal, if you didn't know, he actually called Rudolph Giuliani the other day and congratulated him for what he said last week about Mr. Obama's lack of patriotism. That is President Obama's, if you'd like me to say that at least once. So Jindal is an interesting fellow. He is descended from parents, of course, who came here from India. He was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in 1971. All right, now that's the sticking point. Because this fellow wrote me and he said, it's a shame that all of these bright young GOP stars can't be president because they're not, natural-born citizens. And he included Jindal's name and he included the name of Marco Rubio. Now, if you didn't know it, Ted Cruz was born in Alaska. Or not Alaska, rather, Canada. Alaska being part of the U.S. Cruz was born in Canada. So there's going to be some question if Ted Cruz decided to run for president in the first place about his eligibility, even though he had one American parent, his mother being an American, his father being a Cuban preacher, and then later relocated to the United States and grew up here. But Marco Rubio was born in Miami, Florida, Jindal in Louisiana. Now, to me, that makes them native-born because they were born in hospitals on U.S. soil. John McCain was considered, a natural-born citizen because he was born on a U.S. base in the Panama Canal Zone because his father was serving there. And, bases and embassies and the like would be considered U.S. territory. But this fellow keeps insisting that Jindal cannot be president. And I said, well, wait a second. Why not? He said, well, his parents aren't from here. Well, Andy Jackson's parents weren't from here. So now his argument he's moved the ball down the field. He's sort of like, all right, I'm going to draw a new line, and I'm going to argue from another point. He said, well, those original guys were grandfathered in because the country didn't exist at the time. Okay. All right. But they were still born in territory that became the United States. So I don't get his definition of natural-born citizen. If I am born in the U.S., how many generations does my family have to be here before I am considered natural born? 10? 15? 6? 2? Because in his argument, I don't understand where he's coming from with this. What is his definition of natural born? What do you have to do to actually achieve that? Can anyone help me out on this one? 10 minutes after 9 o'clock, 33-hour temperature. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. Now, this has been the problem with a lot of the illegal immigrants in this country, is that they came here And yes, we can deport them, but what happens to the 3 kids they've had in the last 20 years they've been living in the shadows? And those kids were all born in the good old USA. Those kids are U.S. citizens, right? So that's been and the liberals say, well, if you send the families back, you're just going to be mean. I would say the kids can always come back and run for president if they like in a few years when they've grown up, but that's still a few years out. But I just don't understand this fellow's argument, unless he doesn't like Rubio because his name ends in a vowel, or Jindal because he's a person of color. And I hope it's not those things, because I think that gives people on the right side of the political equation a really bad name. We have a caller with us, and you're next on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And what's your question or comment?
I'm a little confused because your definition, or the guy's definition, means that Obama shouldn't be president either.
Yeah, well, that's true.
And Ted Cruz was born in Canada, but because the mother was American, she was given the option to have dual citizenship, which he had.
Which he only dropped in the last couple of years.
Right when the big controversy came down, then he dropped his Canada citizenship, but he had his American citizenship.
But you see, I would, in the case, if this guy was making an argument about Cruz, I could at least say, all right, he was not born on U.S. soil, he was not born on a U.S. base or in the U.S. embassy. I might be able to buy that argument, but when it comes to Jindal and Rubio, it is nonsense.
Yeah, I agree. And then by this guy's definition, all these people that they want to legalize in this country, they can't become president either, even if their kids are born here, because the parents weren't born here.
And I thank you much for the call. See, you've got to look at this way. The guy is not actually criticizing Cruz in his emails to me, although he may have meant him when he was referring to these young Republicans. But I get a feeling that was not at all what he was talking about here. And he is focused on Jindal especially, and maybe he just doesn't feel that if you have parents who came here from India, you see, again, it just... I'm sorry, but it seems to me that there's some much more deep-seated antipathy he has toward these candidates. You're on the air at 9:33 at our studios on KLIX.
Yeah, it seems interesting that the left totally ignore the fact that their president is Kenya-born Muslim, but yet they want to complain about the right wing.
Of course, we're not going to win that argument, especially after he's been sitting in that office for 6 years.
Yeah, I know it. And it's like the pot calling a stainless steel kettle black.
I thank you much for the call, sir. 914. And, the whole birther controversy, I am not a member of that. On the other hand, I do, when the birth certificate was finally released, not that they had to do it, but the problem was the birth certificate, even liberals had to admit, I saw this on some websites, that there were ways that birth certificate, you could raise some questions about it. And so even though I was not among those people who said, well, he's Kenyan born, I thought it was interesting that even some of the liberals said, oh, the birth certificate is they thought it was a little shady themselves. So toss that one out there. And some of the anomalies that happen with all of that. But I think a guy like Jindal, who might be, a guy like Bobby Jindal was always the smartest kid in the class. That does not necessarily mean you're going to be a great leader. Franklin Roosevelt, who was a great wartime leader in this country, FDR was a C student. He was not a brilliant guy. He spent most of his time, his spare time, working on his stamp collection. They called him, a philatelist? And that was his hobby in life, and he really enjoyed that. But he didn't get into any deep intellectual arguments. It just didn't interest him. Jindal, on the other hand, is the smartest guy in class, and he's right now perhaps the smartest guy in politics. But I think he'd also he's got some leadership skills. A friend of mine who was working in post-Katrina reconstruction in Louisiana has said nothing but wonderful things about Jindal's abilities. When he got elected to Congress or rather to governor from Congress, because he's shown in his efforts in his own district to bring everyone back together and get order restored and put things back together. And so he actually has some good skills when it comes to that too as well. The other part of this is when Jindal criticizes President Obama for being a little too cozy with the Islamic radicals around the world, remember Jindal's parents came from India, and remember at one time India was partitioned between India and Pakistan, as Mr. Obama calls it, and they had a terrible bloodbath where a few million people got killed, that within Bobby Jindal's parents' lifetime. So they know what it's like to deal with radical Islam in his family. And I'll throw in another point about that. In 2010, was at the second Tea Party rally at the Capitol. I went to the one in 2009, and then I went to both Glenn Beck and 2 weeks later the Tea Party rally in Washington. And I was standing on the west lawn of the Capitol after the second rally wrapped up. And I was standing there holding a sign a friend of mine had made. She jokingly put a mask of Barack Obama on the sign, and she found something that looked like a pharaonic sort of a headdress, striped headdress, and put it atop of his head. And of course, a lot of people didn't like that if they were lefties who saw us. They oh, that's racist. No, it was commenting that he is the pharaoh, the king, thinks he is. But it was all, of course, tongue-in-cheek, a reference to the Islamic background in his family as well. And I was standing there while she wandered away. She said, hold this for me. I was standing there holding her sign. Unfortunately, I'm the guy who got photographed, and I'm the guy photographed holding that sign on some of these naughty websites, liberal websites. But a family came by. They were tourists from Mumbai in India. And they saw the sign, and they stopped, and they just unloaded. They said, the rest of the world knows what this guy is, and knows his awful background, and knows where his sympathies lie. And your press in the United States is simply covering all of that up. Isn't that fascinating? That they would share that with me while I was standing there. And so, like Jindal, because of their background, they know this threat. They can see it. It is real to them. Where we have been conditioned by media in this country to ignore it. But getting back to Jindal, again, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, you don't get any more American than that. No, I mean, his idea of a good time is to go to a Saints game on Sunday and perhaps an LSU game on Saturday. This guy, I mean, he's about as American as you can get. But like I say, absolutely brilliant as well. And you got these people out there saying, well, he's not natural born. Define natural born again. And the guy is trying to tell me, well, this is what the founding fathers meant. Really, what did they talk to you? Because, I apparently was doing my homework that night. Oh, come to think of it, they were all long dead. Now I can go back and I can look through their readings and their writings. Madison especially will give you an insight into what they are looking at, into interpreting that Constitution in the papers that he wrote, and of course in the Federalist Papers. But you know what? I don't recall that he made any comments reflecting on that to that degree. Because again, this gets ridiculous. Does your family have to be here 10 generations, 20 generations, 30 generations? I'm sorry, it's nonsense. We have a couple of minutes coming up where we're going to hear from some of our fine sponsors. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLAX and newsradio1310.com. I will also point out in about 20 minutes, it's only going to be a brief visit, but we expect to spend a few minutes with Governor Butch Otter. He'll be talking with us. Because of the time limit, only about 5 minutes this morning, we're going to hit just two subjects. We're going to address broadband issues, and we're going to address transportation funding, as we just heard in the last couple of minutes, coming from Steve Millington. That's going to be a huge issue over the coming weeks at the state capitol. And remember the governor, because he's been rebuffed on this issue before by legislators, simply said in a State of the State address, all right, it's yours. If you're going to just keep giving me a kick in the groin every time I come up with an idea about this, then you take care of it. So he may have some interesting thoughts on that coming up in just a few minutes. Right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Bill Colley with you. 34 at our studios. It's 20 after 9. About 24 minutes now after 9 o'clock, and saw a story today that put a smile on my face. And I told you yesterday that the Washington Post fact checker had been assigned to fact check a movie by the name of American Sniper because they were trying to discredit it in hopes that it would not win the Academy Award for Best Picture last year. And of course, the orchestrated left-wing effort to discredit the film apparently paid off because some obscure movie ended up getting the crown. But every once in a while, that Washington Post fact checker actually looks at something. He goes into it with the idea he's going to discredit someone, but finds that he cannot. And I'm sharing the story with you. He was looking to discredit a war veteran. And they were apparently doing that with Chris Kyle, too. But in this case, they lost. And it is being cited in today's Washington Examiner. Beckett Adams, the writer. Washington Post fact checker gives rare all-true mark to a Republican congressman. 9:25:35 at our studios. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story at newsradio1310.com and newsradio1310 KLIX. Representative Mike Kaufman, who's a Republican from Colorado, achieved a very rare feat Monday. He earned a Geppetto checkmark from the Washington Post official fact checker. Now, usually they give out Pinocchios. And the guy he has a scale which is assigned by himself. And it's 1 to 4 Pinocchios, I believe. If he thinks someone is telling an outright lie, it's 4 Pinocchios. If he thinks you're telling a half-truth, it might be 3 2 Pinocchios. Or if you may have omitted some facts, it'll be 1 Pinocchio. Rarely ever do they assign a Geppetto, though, for honesty. Kaufman's claim drew the attention after he and Veterans Affairs Secretary Robert McDonald got into a heated exchange earlier this month during a budget hearing on the troubled federal agency. When pressed for answers, the VA's secretary said, quote, "I ran a large company, sir. What have you done?" Unquote. Oh, you ran a large company. Good for you. The Republican congressman and veteran of the Gulf War shot back, quote, "Let me start by telling you something I haven't done. I have never run a federal agency that tolerates corruption the way the VA has. I've never built a hospital that's years behind schedule and hundreds of millions of dollars over budget," unquote. And after the exchange, after the hearing, the office of the congressman, he didn't even bring it up at the hearing. He did not look for personal gain, issued his war record. And you know what? Joni Ernst has been criticized because she said that she's a freshman senator from Iowa. She said that she had been in a combat zone while she was serving in uniform. And of course, technically she was, even though she wasn't out being, buzzed by bullets. But she was in what was considered a combat zone because she was working with a support group. And yes, they were within range of rockets and anything else someone could throw their way, even though they were never under fire. But in the case of the congressman from Colorado, he was. He was leading troops in firefights. So he got a perfect score from the Washington Post fact checker. Meanwhile, the VA secretary apparently told some homeless vet on the street the other day, the VA secretary said, I was in special forces. Well, he wasn't. And as long as we're on the topic, apparently liberals are still trying to push the envelope on this one, but Bill O'Reilly has been cleared. Last night on his program, was it last night? He had a reporter from NBC who was leading the bureau in Argentina during the Falkland War, who came on O'Reilly's show and said, indeed, the war zone wasn't just the Falkland Islands where the British and the Argentine troops were fighting, but was in Argentina itself because of the debacle on the government's part. The country quickly descended into civil war. And yes, there were riots in the streets, and the military was involved in trying to suppress those. And yes, indeed, Bill O'Reilly, you were right. You were in that zone. This all comes from that reporter, that communist David Korn from the communist magazine Mother Jones, who said O'Reilly was fibbing just like Brian Williams about his experiences. Korn, meanwhile, was on Hugh Hewitt's show the other day, and when Hewitt started bringing up some of these subjects, Korn decided to end the interview. Click, gone. Just decided to hang up. So his accusations are unraveling. Meanwhile, the Washington Post published a story last night saying, O'Reilly, we've got him by the short hairs. And then the video broke from CBS that actually showed the rioting going on that O'Reilly was in the center of. Oops. And the guy Eric Engberg, who worked at CBS News, was a lout who came out and said O'Reilly was lying. I know Eric Engberg. In 1993, August 18th, 1993, Sarah Ann Wood, daughter of a minister, 11 years old, went vanished. She had been kidnapped and we later discovered killed by a child molester. near their home just outside of Utica, New York. I was working as the weekend editor running the desk at the CBS TV affiliate in Syracuse, New York at the time. And in came the 48 Hours crew from CBS. And the big star, Eric Engberg, at the time for CBS News, one of their top reporters supposedly, the guy slept walk through the whole few days they were there covering the story. And then he called me up on the phone and asked me for some video and any interviews I might have so he could put all of those together and make himself look like the heroic reporter on the story. That's not being reported. I commented in the Washington Post comments section after that story last night. Nobody from Pravda on the Potomac has gotten back to me yet. Score one for the good guys and the evildoers on the American left. Got to try harder. We got more coming up. Governor Butch Otter from Idaho scheduled to join us back just about 10 minutes or so, right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Top story with Bill Colley, 35 at our studios at 9:30. If you go to the website today of News Radio 1310 KLIX, well, I'm not going to say we're under attack from China, at least not intentionally. But if you go to the website, newsradio1310.com, there is a story you can check out. Some people who saw a bright object in the sky a couple of days ago, you were seeing an object. That has been confirmed. Now, some people saying, meteorite, other people saying it, could have been a junk from a Chinese rocket launched in December, and it was in low orbit, and it came crashing down. Luckily, not on my house. I would not be a happy camper if that happened, and I don't know if the Chinese would be willing to give me some sort of settlement. Probably just come harvest my organs is all. Somebody on the Politburo needs a kidney transplant, I'm sure. But liver transplant if they were Russians, but that's another story. So this happened, and apparently it has been confirmed, and we have the details on our website. I should also note that my sister who lives in western New York State, they had a similar experience a few days ago, which leads me to believe either there's a lot of Chinese space junk up there or there is some sort of large meteor shower going on around the world right now and people are seeing it. And she lives on the other side of the continent practically, where they happen to see something go streaking through the sky over the course of last weekend. So yes, there has been some confirmation on all of this. And if you get a chance, look at the picture because we are talking a very, very bright object as it came streaking through. Maybe not quite as bright as, you remember in Russia a couple of years ago? Some of you may have recollection of that, where that large rock went soaring through the sky and it was during daylight hours and then exploded and shattered windows throughout one city. But yeah, there's some great video here that we have posted, and of course that comes from a KMVT TV as well. But you can see this thing just streaking through the sky, and it is obvious it is not something you would normally have in that situation. So it has likely crashed somewhere over Idaho or Utah or Montana. And if you're out there wandering and you see some little green men, call the government first, right? And they'll cover that up. And then in a couple of weeks, we'll hear about it on George Norrie's program. You don't actually believe everything you hear on George Norrie, do you? I mean, it is entertaining as all get out. I'm one of those people, I sit here and I listen to it and I think to myself, yeah, it's kind of fun. But if you go around quoting all of that all day long, we talked earlier about the psychologist wanting to drug you here in the state of Idaho. Well, they'll be definitely doing it if you keep it up. One other quick comment. I was mentioning the Veterans Administration earlier and some of the issues going on with members of Congress and the like. One of the ranking Democrats on the House Veterans Affairs Committee is skipping the American Legion's National Conference. Her name is Corinne Brown. She's a Democrat from Florida. She has only been on the committee since last summer. Veterans groups had not wanted her. They had actually favored a Republican, or Democrat rather, by the name of Tim Walz from Minnesota, who actually had some wartime experience. But instead, Democrats decided that she was the person they wanted on the committee. She reaffirmed at a hearing in July of last summer that the, quote, VA system is one of the best systems in the United States. That is what I'm saying, unquote. So she might be a bit of a shill for the Obama White House, wouldn't you say? And after she heard from some other people on the committee and publicly and veterans that they disagreed, she said, quote, I personally think the VA system is an A or a 10, unquote. Of course, that was on a scale of 650, right? Yeah, okay. Well, Let her explain herself a little bit more. In a few minutes, we expect to be joined by Idaho Governor Butch Otter. Again, 5 minutes. Trying to do a political interview in 5 minutes is not exactly the easiest thing that you can accomplish. And just because of the length of time, we're not going to be taking any telephone calls today. Admittedly, you get about 30 seconds to ask a question. Then we've got 4 minutes. In a 5-minute interview, you introduce the governor for 30 seconds. You do a 30-second wrap-up, so you're down to 4 minutes. And this is where, when the governor's on, you end up getting those statement callers anyway who want to take up 2 minutes of that time. So we're just going to have to ask 2, I think, very brief questions and get an answer from the governor on those. But he has pledged that he is going to try to do this on a lengthier basis sometime soon. So we're looking forward to that and give people an opportunity. We'd love to get him in studio. In New Jersey, our sister stations at Town Square Media do a weekly program with Chris Christie called Ask the Governor. I'm in favor of doing something like that where we could have some time and he could just sit down and I'd pick up the phone. He'd do all the talking directly back and forth with members of the public. That is a work in progress at the moment, but I do believe it would be very positive and it would allow people a much better chance and really maybe even learn some things about government too along the way and really good interaction we could have going on. But as I say, it's not in the cards right now. In the meantime, 36 at our studios. We're probably going to reach our daytime high by late morning. I don't know that we're going to see a huge warm-up throughout the afternoon. The weather forecast it's not terrible. It's not like any huge rain showers or anything coming in the next several days. But we are looking at temperatures that are considerably cooler than where they have been in the last couple of weeks. But still plenty of sunshine over the next few days. And let's face it, it's only February still. We have a lot of time left before we start talking about walking around in our Hawaiian shirts and shorts. Weather, of course, coming up throughout the day right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com with Bill Colley. This is Top Story. Pushing the envelope slightly here. Apparently some of our folks in some of our competing cities taking a bit more time with the governor than we expected. But you know what? We can always tee it up and try to do it on another day. 9:44 at our studios, News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story. Got about 15 minutes left. And, of course, Governor Mike Huckabee also joining us a little bit later with the Huckabee Report, brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. The telephone number there would be 736-6563. Well, I don't like to do this. I don't like to try to take a call, hot call it as we say it when we're live on the air, especially with a very special guest. But I believe we have the office of Governor Butch Otter online with us right now, coming up on 9:45. Am I on the right spot with that, Governor?
Bill, this is himself.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
You got music. Me, you got the office, you got the Capitol building right now.
the music was fading a little bit, and I just wanted to make sure that I had the right caller because it might be somebody calling about some weather issue. First of all, thank you for joining.
I hope whoever's calling about weather is praying for more rain and snow.
The rain we could use. Governor, first of all, thank you for joining us today.
You bet.
And right off the top, I just spent about half an hour with Steve Millington from the Twin Falls Republicans in the last hour, and as he was getting ready to leave, we had a conversation about the broadband situation, which is getting a lot of attention in media, specifically. Right. Now, I think that we are both aware that you are not necessarily a cup of tea for a lot of these editorial writers. There is some.
Boy, that's the understatement.
Yeah, I'd say so. You've got some of them who I think are suggesting they're trying to draw comparisons to what happened in Oregon, and perhaps they're trying to beat the drum for some sort of similar type of action here in Idaho. Are you at all worried or concerned?
Well, first off, let me say, welcome. Welcome. Where'd you come from?
Delaware.
Okay, well, welcome to Idaho. Let me say first off that the legislature has done the right thing in funding the IEN through the balance of this year. That gives us an opportunity to look on into the future and what we're going to do for a long-term contract in order to qualify for the E-rate money, in order to get it done right this time. And so I am grateful to the legislature in recognizing the value of the IEN to the state of Idaho and to our students. Bill, this is probably the first time we have it in our constitutional requirement to provide for a system of free, uniform, and thorough common public schools. Now, that isn't verbatim, but it's all of those things in there, and that means whether there's a student that lives in some small town in Idaho or in West Ada, which is the largest school district in the state, they have a right to the same kind of education that students, no matter where they live. With the IEN, we've been able to reach out with hard-to-place classes that we couldn't get teachers for before, because now they can be taught over the internet with the Idaho Education Association. So I believe we've got a great path forward. I believe that the legislature has demonstrated great support in understanding the value of the Idaho Education Network, not only to the students, but also to the future of wiring Idaho for telemedicine, for libraries, for commerce, for every other thing that we would possibly use the internet for. The editorial writers, I have to tell you, we have to go forward with what we think is the right thing to do, and that's what we're doing.
We've only actually got about 90 seconds left because we had such a short window this morning. But
I apologize.
Well, no, that's okay. We can do this again some other day. But quickly, transportation issues. I know in your address you had said, you pretty much said, all right, I've heard from all of you in the past. I'm going to turn it around and put it in your laps this time around. I'm kind of paraphrasing. Right. Do you think that they're taking the wise course with what they released this week?
Yes. Well, what I was referring to was in 2008 and 2009, there was a lot of folks that just didn't think we needed extra money for education. There were a lot of folks that were expressing frustration and a lack of confidence in the leadership that we had in the Department of Education or in the Department of Transportation, because there was some figures that were being put out that weren't right, and there was some situations where anyway they were frustrated with the Department of Transportation, and so they didn't buy into the fact that we needed more money for maintenance and repair. I will tell you now that the discussion hasn't been that we need $200 million. The discussion has been where are we going to get the $200 million? So that's changed the dynamic of the debate substantially. I'm still not in favor of taking it out of the general fund, because then you've got to fight education, health and welfare, and corrections for it every year, because those three budgets are about 94% of the entire budget.
On that note, I know it was very short, but we'll talk to you again sometime in the next month or so.
All right.
And I do appreciate you taking some time out for us this morning.
You bet, Bill. Delaware's loss, our gain.
Hey, thank you very much, sir. God bless you.
Bet.
Take care now.
Thanks.
Coming up next, Governor Mike Huckabee with the Huckabee Report right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX. And, of course, the Huckabee Report is brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. Telephone number 736-6563. That number again, 736-6563. Governor Huckabee was featured in a Washington Post story. You may actually have seen that in the last couple of days. He has been, we should point out, I think he's still there for a few more days, visiting in Israel. In the last 42 years, he has gone on trips to Israel sometimes as often as 3 times per year. And what he does, he often takes tourists along with him. They have an entire itinerary. He plays tour guide. The story in the Post focused on him taking these people to Masada and pointing out that Masada might be a really good, and you may remember the movie from the late 1970s starring Peter Strauss and Peter O'Toole that focused on that particular chapter of Jewish history. But he says it really tells you a great deal. It's a metaphor for what the people in that part of the Holy Land have gone through in the course of history. And I couldn't make up my mind as I was reading this story whether the writer was trying to be nice to Governor Huckabee or if it was the usual Washington Post hit job, because I thought in a way they were trying to make him look like a cheesy tour guide because he takes these people. But the people get to meet the Israeli prime minister and several other leaders in the Israeli government. They get to eat in 5-star restaurants. They get to see all of these beautiful sights. They do not go to Bethlehem because it is currently under the control of the other guys. But they can stand at a particular spot and actually look down over it. They also go to the Wailing Wall and they leave prayers behind. It's a fascinating tale about how much time he has spent there, though, over the course of 4 decades, and he has become perhaps, if you're an Israeli politician, Governor Mike Huckabee is likely your best friend in the United States. So the story really detailed all of that, and he has mentioned in some of the reports in the last couple of weeks that he has been in Israel, and that's where he is actually taping some of these. But his days are very, very long, playing tour guide as well, and traveling all around the country. 9:56, Bill Colley with you on, going to call it Top Story one more time this morning. Rush Limbaugh will be coming up following the 10 o'clock news from Fox. We do want to thank Governor Otter for taking a few minutes with us. Originally, we had planned on, I was one of the last people that had pitched my thoughts about talking with him this morning. He's doing a whole round robin around the state on various radio shows. And so we had originally kicked around the idea of doing it right after the 9 o'clock news, but we ran headlong into some of the other stations were first on the list. So they told me the other day that next time around, we're going to be first with picking time slots. So we'll get more time with the governor coming up sometime in the next few weeks, which I'm looking forward to. I really do believe that there is going to be a headhunt going on, though, from liberals, especially in Washington, who are going to try to bring the Justice Department in on this situation when it comes to broadband. The thing is, the guy has won, even though he's had some primary opponents. He's won election 3 times as governor, which tells you that the people of the state, the majority, trust him. And I think that they trust Republican governance. There was a figure that came out from Randy Staples. He gave it to us yesterday. You are the 9th least taxed state in the country. And for all of the whining they do in the Times News and in some of the other liberal bastions in the state, and they are few, about how the little guy is being put to the test, if you will, when it comes to taxes. Well, if your tax burden is that low, what are you worried about? It brings jobs to the state. So we hope that they're caterwauling over it. Well, a lot of that will go away when a certain editorial writer goes away as well, and that'll be soon. 9:58. Well, we don't like it here anyway. Leave town. News is coming up, as I pointed out. Limbaugh at 10 for 3 hours with Rush Limbaugh. Sean Hannity following news at 1 o'clock this afternoon. Glenn Beck following news at 4 o'clock this afternoon. And God willing and the creek don't rise, I'm right back here tomorrow on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.